Hello, good evening. My name is Marciana Popescu, and I'm very, very happy to welcome you all to this evening in which we will talk about a very sensitive but very timely topic, violence against migrant women. Before we get into the topic, I wanted to just share with you a few words about this project. This is a community-driven project that focused on bringing the voices of women migrants in general and women asylum seekers in particular to the center of all of our agendas, trying to understand from their perspective how do they experience the challenges brought by forced migration? How do they experience these challenges in the context of New York City, an urban context that comes with, barriers and limitations, but also with resources that they can or cannot access. Also, most important, we wanted to learn from them to understand what can we do to improve both policies and services. So this evening, we have with us three amazing ladies. The project brought together social work students, social work practitioners, and women activists. And today we have a great representation of these merged groups. So Marthy Kindy is one of our women activists that will share with us some of her experiences and her questions, as well as her suggestions when it comes to addressing violence against women. We do have Evelyn Morales, who is a licensed social worker working with an agency that is focusing on domestic violence and violence against women. And she was with us in this project for almost a year now. And Alison Adler, who is an MSW student. She's also placed with Catholic Charities and is working with asylum-seeking communities. With no further ado, I'll invite them to share with you some important facts and lessons on violence against migrant women.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Before we begin, we just want to take a moment to offer a trigger warning. We will be talking about some topics that may be difficult for some of you in our audience to hear. So we will be talking about things like rape, sexual assault, and other forms of violence against women. So if you feel that this is triggering you at any point, please don't hesitate to step away from the presentation, take care, and to seek help if you need it. And here we have some resources that you can access, and we'll leave it up for a few moments so you can write these down if you think you might need them at any point. And we also have additional resources in English, Spanish, and Russian on our website at hermigranthub.org/resources/domestic violence. And we'll share these again at the end of the presentation, but please do take a picture or write them down if you feel that you need them right now. Okay, so we're going to begin with some reflection questions, and you can just think about these or you can write down your answers, and we'll return to them again at the end of the presentation. So our first question is, what do you think of when you hear the phrase violence against women? And the next one, why do you think women choose to stay in an abusive situation? And do you struggle with that question? So think about those words and think about how you would feel if someone asked you that question, why you chose to stay, or how you would feel asking somebody that question. And what would you say? And our final question is, how does being a forced migrant woman, or how do you think being a forced migrant woman impacts a woman's experience of violence? So you can take a moment to reflect on these, and we hope to hear what you have to say about them at the end of the presentation. Excuse me. So what do we mean by violence against women? This term encompasses a lot of different things. So we are talking about intimate partner violence or domestic violence, physical violence, rape and gang rape, sex trafficking, forced marriage, neglect, verbal abuse, and also financial abuse, which is when a woman's access to or use of money is limited or controlled by somebody else. And all of these forms, all of these forms of violence can be encompassed by the term gender-based violence, which the UN High Commissioner of Refugees refers to as a harmful act directed at an individual based on their gender. And it's rooted in gender inequality, the abuse of power, and harmful norms. And it's considered a serious violation of human rights and a life-threatening health and protection issue. The term gender-based violence is also a more encompassing term, and it acknowledges how the types of violence that we showed on the previous slide can occur to people of all backgrounds, gender identities, and sexual orientations. And we want to acknowledge this. However, women and girls are still the most at risk and still the most affected by gender-based violence. And for the purposes of our presentation, we will focus on women who are forced migrants. And we are also going to therefore continue to use the term violence against women, but we just wanted to introduce this term and acknowledge what it holds. Okay. So when speaking about violence against women, we want to acknowledge and emphasize that it is multidimensional and complex. And it's multidimensional because it occurs over time and space, and it can occur at the hands of one or multiple people. In the case of women forced migrants, violence can occur before, during, and after migration. And at each stage of the journey, violence can occur at one or multiple levels. So it can occur at the level of the individual, which in social work we call the micro level, the level of the community or the meso level, and the larger level of society, which we call the macro level. And we know that factors from each of these levels intersect. And during our presentation, we will break down how violence at each of these levels comes into play before, during, and after migration. So I'm going to start by talking about violence as a cause of forced migration. And then my co-panelists will talk about violence against women during and after migration. So one moment, please. So on the individual level, women who choose to migrate due to violence may experience years of violence committed by intimate partners or spouses or family members. Some also flee situations where they are forced to marry men who are much older than them or who they do not know. And some flee situations where they may feel unsafe in a society where there are high levels of rape or sexual assault against women committed by strangers in their community. On the level of the community, women may be compelled to leave situations where violence against women is supported or engaged in by gangs, the military, or the police. And in some countries, these community-level organizations use violence against women essentially as a tool or a tactic of oppression and control. And we saw this, for example, during the civil war in Guatemala, where the military used rape to oppress indigenous women. Violence on the individual and community level are reinforced by factors in the larger society. And this includes structural elements and discourses that promote or support violence against women. This includes patriarchal gender norms, poverty and inequality, bias and discrimination towards indigenous women, trans women, or women of color. All of those can contribute to violence against women and be used as a means of justifying violence. Other structural factors are the existence of a criminal justice system that doesn't prosecute offenders of violence against women, or that doesn't even follow through on reports of violence against women. And most recently, a major factor that has contributed to high levels of violence against women was the COVID-19 pandemic and the constraints that it placed on existing services for women who experience violence. And crises like the pandemic can reveal how systems in place to protect women are inadequate or non-existent. And the lack of these systems or their inadequacy can be a factor that pushes women to migrate. So we like to think of violence against women as this discrete problem or as something that exists between a woman and her partner or her family. And that is the case in many cases, but regardless of the type of violence. There are also larger systems in place that normalize that violence and that make it difficult for women to seek justice and safety, and that can be a driver of forced migration. So to illustrate how these different factors come together in the before migration, Marti is going to share a story with us about a woman who experienced violence on all of these levels and who was not able to feel safe and receive justice because of her political affiliation.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marti Kimdi, and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm going to share one of the story of one of my friend, high school friend, who get killed due to her political opinion, and she was born and raised in Burkina Faso, and then due to her political problem, she had to flee to Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire. You can see the two arrows, Cote d'Ivoire, and she tried to come back later on, like a couple months ago, and this is what happened to her. I'm going to share her story. Her name is Jelware Minata. Into last year, she was in jail last year, and what happened? She's a single mom who take care of her son and her mom. She was sent to jail in 2020 due to a political opinion. According to her family, she had a health issue and requested to see a doctor due to the authority, to see a doctor, like to get like treatment. And the authority denied her request many times. One day, her mom went to visit her, and she told her mom that she had been getting sexual abuse in the jail, and she will prefer to die than go through what she's going right now. Due to the priority, because because the family was very poor, the family doesn't have money. They don't have money to take a lawyer that can defend them. They weren't able to get a lawyer, and to get her out of jail. And also in my country, the authority doesn't provide you a free lawyer. We don't have a free lawyer. And through all this hard moment, because she wasn't able to get a lawyer and she had to defend herself, and then she was condemned, like they sentenced her for 20 years in jail, and she had to go back to the prison after her sentence days, and she struggled due to the physical violence she was getting. No one wanted to listen to her. She was have a little blood on her body. She can no word. No one would like to listen to her. And this is how she died last year on the jail. This is an example to show you guys how we women as a woman been getting treated no matter where we are during the migration, or even, she didn't get a chance to migrate. That was her story for one of my friends, January. Thank you. And
thank you, Marti. This is such a compelling story, and we realize the emotions that are packed in this story and the emotions that Marti went through when sharing with us. And we would be amiss if we wouldn't stop a little and think about the current situation. This is why it became so important for us to really hold this webinar tonight. Once again, we're dealing with conflict. Conflict is ongoing. It's not like it's something new. It's happening all the time, although we thought we left it behind us. Right now, we have hundreds of thousands of people on the run. Ukraine is under attack. Ukraine is under war. It's not the only area of the earth right now, but this is the newest conflict we are dealing with. Who are the people? The majority of the people on the run? Women and children. Women that raise their voices are even more targeted. Women that already lack support systems are pushed out of their communities. In the process, they continue to be caregivers. As Marti's story told us, like they take care of children, they can take care of parents, So when they are on the run, all these immediate systems are affected. They do not have, we do not have, as a society, as a global society, we do not have the systems that could intervene and protect them. We should have them. We have international laws. However, what we learned today is that although we have laws, the way in which these laws are implemented do not necessarily provide the support that women need. And this is why when we talk about these issues, we want to share the struggles and the challenges for the purpose of trying to find solutions. See what is there that is needed. What kind of support systems can women rely on in their countries of origin during times of persecution and conflict, on the migration trajectories, crossing borders after borders after borders into other oppressive systems? What are the support systems there? And also in the countries of destination, where they come because they are seeking shelter. What does that shelter entail? And is such shelter providing the protection that women need? So I wanted to pause a little bit and just think about the complexity of the issue in the complexity of the context we are dealing with. Thank you.
I'm going to expand a little bit on how the women get violated during the migration. We can say in one way like this, consequences during the migration are very serious. Example of these consequences can be sexual abuse, health issue, traumatization, stress and memory loss due to their travel condition, physical abuse if they do not follow the direction given to them by the travel bus. The travel buses can be like, you know, when you take on the boat to travel, the chef, the boss of the boat, like they would take money from you and they would say, do this, do this, do this. You have to do this. If you don't have money, you have to give us your sex. We have to do sex to you. We do with you. And they don't have choice. They have to accept. If not, they will be living in the desert, like on the bruise, with no choices. Also, we also have certain people even die. We have death of certain women in the boat and disposable of this body overboard. Like if you die in the boat, they don't even call their family. They just throw your body on the sea. That's what they do. They don't even contact one of your family to say, oh, this person lost her life. No, they don't do that. They just throw your body. And this is very sad for what we're going through in this world. So this is an example of a picture showing how you see the boat, like the boat, and you see the water, how they're going through. You see the right one, she's with her daughter, a baby. Look at the child sitting close to her. She's very stressed and crying. Only God knows what she went through. And the right side, the left side, you see one of the boys punching the woman. We don't know what happened. That's an example of the picture of how they're struggling during their migration. And we're going to listen a very sad moment story of one of my friends who traveled from my country, Burkina Faso, to New York City to the border because she couldn't take it. Her life was in danger. She shared her story, and anytime I'm listening to the story, it's very painful. So we're gonna listen together how she's speaking French, but you will see the translation on the screen.
Je m'appelle Aurélie. Je suis originaire de Pays de Mai. J'ai fui mon pays parce que ma vie était en danger. J'étais recherchée par ma famille parce que j'ai refusé de me marier à un homme que je ne connaissais même pas. Par faute de moyens, je suis rentrée aux États-Unis par le bateau. Mais le chemin n'a pas été du tout facile pour moi. J'ai failli perdre ma vie dans le bateau. Et en plein milieu de mer, le prix du bateau ne coûtait que 200 000 francs seulement. Mais je n'avais pas d'argent pour payer. j'ai dit au patron du bateau que j'allais appeler ma cousine pour qu'elle m'aide avec de l'argent. Et après, donc il a accepté de m'embarquer en espérant son argent après. Malheureusement pour moi, je n'ai pas eu l'argent pour payer. Et c'est là que le chef du bateau m'a dit que si je ne payais pas son argent, il va me laisser en pleine bouche ou bien il va faire l'amour avec moi. Et comme je n'avais pas le choix, j'étais obligée d'accepter. Et j'ai fait l'amour avec lui, y compris trois de ses amis. Et c'est là que j'étais devenue livreuse du sexe dans le bateau jusqu'à Guatemala. Et de Guatemala, ma cousine m'a envoyé de l'argent pour que je puisse continuer mon voyage jusqu'aux États-Unis. Arrivé à Floride, on m'a enfermée et je n'avais pas accès aux aides. C'est là que j'ai fait rentrer mes papiers à l'immigration. Après quelques temps là-bas, je suis partie dans la ville de New York grâce à un ami. Et depuis que je suis arrivée là-bas, ma vie a changé parce que je travaille.
Listen, a very sad moment. Her name is Awa Kabore, and she's sharing us what happened to her when she was coming. Very sad moment, like I was saying. And the Bruce, she have to do sex with the other people that she didn't even know. She didn't know their health condition. It's very a sad moment.
And if I can intervene just another second here, the important element here is it's to realize that the level of trauma that women that are migrating are dealing with, right? So when they arrive at the point of destination, what services are there in place to address the trauma that they went through? And the services should actually address health issues, mental health issues, of shelter and accommodation, as well as training and employment, because trauma actually affects their ability to function, affects our ability to function as human beings. Therefore, more attention needs to be given to that. So as service providers, what do we learn? We learn that there is so much trauma involved in the process of forced migration that we need to understand, to step back from, and then to be able to start addressing. All our services as service providers need to be trauma informed, so we can provide the right responses and link people to the resources they need.
Thank you, Marthy.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
So in the previous two sections, we've discussed how escape from threats of abuse and experiences of violence in their country of origin can be a compelling factor for forced migration for women and girls. We've also heard the powerful words of women who experience dangerous, violent, and exploitative conditions during transit. The reality of forced migration is that there are no safety measures in place to prevent violence against women at any point during the migration journey. And as much as we want to believe that exploitation and abuse ends once a woman or girl has reached her destination, the reality is that violence doesn't end once the destination is reached. So at ICE detention centers, migrants are dehumanized and deprived of human rights, locked up in crowded, unsafe spaces, conditions which proved to be deadly in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. These centers are not claimed by either government at the US-Mexico border and are not under the jurisdiction of the United Nations. That means that no one is being held accountable for protecting human rights or for rights that are being violated. Women and girls are particularly vulnerable to yet another layer of complexity in their detainment, that being sexual violence and exploitation at the hands of police and border agents, intimate partners, and other migrants, and have faced experiences of medical negligence and forced sterilizations at the hands of healthcare providers. When reaching the intended country, we see many women are still facing violence at the individual, community, and societal levels. Women and girls may experience violence at the hands of either a partner or family member they traveled with, someone they came to join, a new partner in the US, and employers, especially those in the informal economy. In general, an individual's immigration status can lead to increased vulnerability to violence, as they often lack access to social, legal, and work protections. Factors such as legal dependency, language barriers, fear of deportation, and losing their only source of income may prevent a survivor from reporting their abuse or contacting law enforcement. At the community level, individuals whose primary language is not English may encounter obstacles when accessing social and legal supports. At a larger scale, the lack of decent work and social protections continue to perpetuate patriarchal norms that normalize violence and encourage silence. The lack of precautionary measures to protect the safety of women who report abusers and fear that those who respond to reports may treat them as criminals prevent women from reporting violence. The public health response to the COVID-19 pandemic meant that stay-at-home order shutdowns, decreases of employment rates, and the reliance on telehealth services trapped women in close quarters with abusers, unable to access health, social, and legal supports, and inability to leave abusive labor conditions. So here are some quotes from the focus groups that we've held for her Migrant Hub that speak about the post-migration experiences with gender-based violence. So one asylee explained that her intimate partner violence increased during the stay-at-home order because she had to live with her husband 24/7 and was not able to leave the house during the day. Sexual assault is part of her daily life. She said, "My life is not secure because I feel that my husband can go crazy one day, and the violence could cost me my life." She fears that as a result of violence her children witness, they may experience long-term psychological consequences. With her children doing school remotely, she worries that they see everything happening between their mom and dad. Domestic violence affects everyone in the family. Sometimes it's not even physical violence, it's verbal. For instance, if your partner keeps insulting you, this can cause depression and lead to physical violence. Sometimes you feel that you should end your life. We need help. So these quotes, they reflect the fear of what the consequences of experiencing violence can bring. Next slide, please. And in general, the trauma of experiencing or witnessing violence may also be coupled with housing and financial instability, constant surveillance or monitoring by institutions, cultural insensitivity, and lack of trauma-informed care. It is so important to talk about violence as a public health issue and one that extends farther than just the survivors of violence. When this trauma occurs at any age, it can have detrimental effects on future violence victimization and perpetration, health issues, and opportunities for both survivors and witnesses. These effects can look like attachment issues, anxiety, depression, PTSD, health issues such as high blood pressure or asthma, and behavioral issues or disorders. This can lead to troubles with family members, peers, authority figures, and can stunt development of relationships, education, and careers. The vulnerabilities faced by immigrant populations to access information about their rights, health, social, and legal supports in the community affects how trauma can be exacerbated. So in this context, how are women who experience forced migration protected against violence? So at At the international level, the UN has a Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states equality for all, rights of individuals, and the ability to seek refuge in another nation. The Convention on the Status of the Refugee is used internationally to define the criteria for a refugee. And the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW, is the only international treaty that focuses on the rights of women. At the national level, the US has enacted the Refugee Act, and with that given room for specific protections to give legal status to victims of violence and gender-based violence. These protections include the Special Immigrant Juvenile Status, which protects minors who are victims of abuse and neglect by their caregivers, the T visa, which protects survivors of human trafficking, the U visa, which protects survivors of certain crimes that occur in the US, and the Violence Against Women Act. This protects survivors of domestic violence of any gender and allow for self-petitions, especially if they were relying on the sponsorship of the perpetrators of violence. Also nationally, we have the Civil Rights Act, which makes it illegal for an employer to discriminate against you based on your sex. In New York State, we have a new law, the Senate Bill S343A, which classifies certain threats to report a person's immigration status as extortion or coercion. And in New York City, we have confidentiality laws that ensure people are not denied services based on their immigration status, as well as the human rights law, which prohibits discrimination in employment, housing, and public accommodations based on sex and domestic violence victimization. As a social worker and researcher, working with women and migrants who are survivors of domestic, sexual, and community violence, it is evident that while protections do exist, there are still gaps in policy that leave migrant women, especially undocumented migrants, with very little protections during migration, and to leave exploitative and abusive conditions. So how can we truly address this social issue? So we discussed that violence can be a compelling factor for migration, as well as a risk factor during and post-migration. Lack of safe and regular migration pathways has led women and girls to rely on more dangerous routes. During the COVID-19 pandemic, travel restrictions have made people resort to more dangerous routes. The use of smugglers increases the risk of becoming victims of human and sex trafficking, as well as exploitation in the labor sector. And rising poverty and inability to gain access to decent work has led migrant women to accept risky economic opportunities, rendering them more vulnerable to violence, abuse, and exploitation. So to address and prevent violence against migrant women and girls, it is necessary to increase protections in all countries. The development of transnational treaties that are specific to migrant women provides uniform, accessible information on the basic rights of migrant women across all sectors of society, how rights violations will be addressed, and what protections survivors have in all countries. Creating safe, accessible pathways for migration and residency can help eliminate the need for resorting to dangerous routes that lead to human and sex trafficking and other forms of exploitation. And developing pathways to residency can prevent the dependency on abusive partners and security in reporting abuse. Improving service provisions to survivors. All service providers should be trained on how to respond appropriately to migrant women and their needs, especially those who have experienced violence, and ensure services are provided without discrimination. Access to essential and coordinated services at all stages of migration ensure that women are provided with resources they need throughout the journey.
So before we get to the questions, I wanted to just point on some of the important elements that I hope we take with us. And to also remind everybody that this is the first webinar in a series that will, allow us to go into more detail about what can be done. How do we recognize danger? How do you create a safety plan? What resources are there? How do we use the laws, as limited as they are, the laws that we have in place to make sure that women are protected? Because domestic violence, gender-based violence, any type of violence is against the law. So no matter what is your legal status, that has nothing to do with your rights to be protected, right? But why did we talk about that? Because it is important to understand that there are laws in place. It is also important to understand what will limit women when trying to access these laws. What makes it more difficult for a woman that is an asylum seeker in New York City to seek help when she is a victim of violence, or when she deals with the trauma resulting from the violence she was subjected to? And to learn this, we need to really listen and pay attention to what women in lived experiences of forced migration are telling us. It's this concept of safety. Do we have safe spaces? Do women feel safe? Who do they go to? Who do they turn to? Are lawyers accessible? Is information accessible in languages that, will really make this information usable, right? What about working with support systems? What are the support systems? When women are dealing with health and mental health issues, are professionals and practitioners looking at the trauma that might explain where these issues are coming from? What about employers? So as you can see, there are such complex issues, but as practitioners, I want us to start thinking, what do we need to know about this? Who do we learn it from? And then how do we use what we learn to actually address these issues? Come with innovative solutions, increase access to information. This webinar, like many others, are accessible on our website with subtitles in Spanish, Russian. We're working on also putting French subtitles. Why? Because we need to put the information in the hands of the people that need it most. A list of resources telling you where to go is also available there. So I wanted us to kind of not be left with the sense of, desperation and desolation, thinking nothing can be done. There are serious situations that we are dealing with, but this is why we need to seriously start working together to address them. So I'll give the floor back to you, ladies.
Thank you, Marciana. So again, we're just returning to the questions that we posed at the beginning of the presentation. And this is really a chance for you all in the audience to tell us, you give us your thoughts about these questions and also what you'd like to hear more about, because as Marciana said, we would like to make this a series and we could expand on basically everything that we talked about in this presentation. So we would like to hear from you if there's something in particular that you would like to hear more about. And if you just want to share your thoughts and ideas about this.
And you can speak up or raise your hand, however you prefer.
You can also type it into the Q&A if you don't feel like speaking. Well, in the meantime, we're also going to share again some useful resources to share with those who you think might need it. And please don't be afraid to speak out and to reach out if you are in a situation or if you know someone who is in a situation of violence, because you have the right to live a life free from violence and the right to heal from violence. And if you have caused harm, you also have the right to rehabilitation and to find ways to give back to the community.
Thank you so much. Please keep in mind that we are open to your questions beyond this evening. We would love to hear feedback from you, to know what aspects of violence against women would you like to learn more about. Meanwhile, as I mentioned, we are continuing. It is not by accident that we had this webinar a few days before the International Women's Day, which we celebrate on Tuesday, March 8th. Really recognizing women's power, women's skills, women's agency. I would like to have you think of, okay, what are those elements that make you, if you are living in a context of forced migration, what are those aspects, what are those services that make you feel safe? What do you need to feel safe? Because we need to work together to actually increase safety systems, right? Where do you go in order to find safety? What is safety for you in New York City? We'll continue having these conversations, and our next webinar will really look into the intricate complexities of intimate partner violence, domestic violence, violence within the family, because particularly so when all the other systems and all the other circles around us are not providing safety, it is the family that we turn to find safety. Well, what happens when that family does not provide safety? And what can a migrant woman in New York City do to actually be protected? That is our next webinar. We will send you information about the date, and we will collect questions from you. Meanwhile, please check our website and find the resources that you need. Or if you don't find the resource that you feel would help you, let us know, because we keep adding, and we also keep thinking how to develop services that will address areas that are not addressed yet. Thank you so much. Have a great evening. I'll see you, some of you I will see tomorrow. For everybody else, we wish you a wonderful weekend, and we'll be in touch.